Today I'm speaking with Laurentia Wells. Laurentia, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Absolutely, and I'm so glad to meet you. And just for a quick bio, Laurentia lives in Florida and she works as a personal fitness trainer. And she's also a freelance writer, including doing some travel blogging, which I'm more than a little jealous about. She was a Christian for over 50 years. So you've got me beat. I was in for 43. She's got me beat. But her YouTube channel is called The Doubter's Diary. And I do want to encourage everybody, you're doing some great work there, Laurentia. Awesome stuff. So everyone, please do go like and subscribe and check out her videos there. But that's what I know about you so far. Before we get in your story, could you tell us more about yourself and some fun things too?
Sure. As you said, I'm a fitness trainer, so I like working out. I'm one of those rare breeds that I enjoy going to the gym. So I do that every day. I like to golf. We enjoy the beach and we do love travel. We just got back from South America, and that's the first time I had been to South America. So that was a lot of fun. Great times.
What countries did you get to?
We went to Panama, we went to Colombia, and then we did the ABC Islands, Aruba and Curacao and Bonaire. So it was just amazing. Whole family went. We had a great time. So I'll have to write about that when I have a chance. But that
Yeah,
was great.
that's awesome. That's so cool. Well, I'm so glad you're here again, and we love to hear people's stories. So I wanted to invite you, if you could, to take us back to the earliest days. What was it like growing up as a kid, and in terms of Christianity? When was the first time you heard about Jesus, and how did that relationship go?
Well, it starts before me. My mother was Jewish, and we grew up in the West in a very, very tiny rural town. And my mother had grown up in the 40s and 50s when racism was alive and well. So my mother had a really rough time. And her parents were actually communist atheists. So she grew up with no religion. They had left the Jewish faith. She grew up with no religion, although you can see in her school pictures that she actually wore a little cross to try and fit in. And she would often tell me that how awful it was to try and fit in. And she hoped that her nose did not look like her father. And so she had a very different background than my father, who grew up as a Christian, and he grew up as a non-denominational Christian. So when they got married, he did convert her. I think she was looking for something. Her father was very distant, very into his communism, and she was just looking for something. And they got married, and she took that ball and ran with it far past my father. And so her background really affected her children. She had four daughters. I'm the oldest. And she was very, very concerned that we grew up with something that she didn't have. And that pressure to make her feel happy was a large part of my experience growing up, trying to make my mother happy and my father happy. Now, their marriage wasn't the best because of the religion. I know that sounds odd. He brought her into it, but she became convinced because he liked to drink, he liked to smoke, he liked to socialize. She was convinced that he wasn't really saved because he didn't have the fruits of the Spirit. And that caused a tremendous amount of tearing our house apart. So, what should have brought the home together ended up causing chaos. It ended up causing havoc. It ended up making me codependent because I was trying to make my father happy on one side, my mother happy on the other side. And I was saved when I was about 5. That's the earliest I remember of my mother sitting down with me and telling me essentially that I was a broken human being and that I needed Jesus to save me. And I said the sinner's prayer. And it's something that I can't say was a one-time thing, though. I won't say it was a one-time thing because I was consistently scared that that it hadn't stuck, that I was so damaged that this one sinner's prayer could have possibly stick. So the sinner's prayer was not a one-time thing for me because I felt so damaged, even as 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, that I felt like I had to continually get saved. And I'm sure, Tim, that you've heard that before, or even maybe for yourself. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think what the big thing that came into my equation was the question of how much fighting of sin is enough fighting to claim you're a Christian. In other words, if you're a Christian, you're not going to want to keep sinning. That's what caused your Lord and Savior to have to be nailed to the cross. You're not going to want to, as it were, re-nail him to the cross by sinning again on purpose. So you're going to want to have a heart of righteousness and that pursues holiness, and therefore to intentionally sin is kind of proof that you don't take sin seriously. But that's the whole point of being a Christian, is that that's the biggest issue on the plate. And so I always came back to, if you're not really fighting sin, then you need to question if you're saved at all. So yeah, it came back quite a bit.
Yes, it does. And in fact, when I remember being 12, and my little church, it was very tiny and non-denominational. And so those might be the scariest kind of churches in America. And I'll tell you why, because there's no rails. Okay, there's nothing to stop this church from going off the rails. You don't have a denomination that's at least putting some guardrails there. You have a pastor who's here, and you have every little tiny crowd down here, and it can go left really fast. Okay, and all kinds of crazy things can happen. And my church ended up turning into almost an end times cult. I'm not going to call it
Wow.
a cult because they didn't actually try and cut us off from the outside world. But other than that, it turned into a cult where my parents really believed that nothing mattered in the future. And I remember being 12 years old and writing out a bucket list because I was convinced I wasn't going to live to 20. I was convinced that I was going to be raptured before I was 20. And so here I am as a little child over and over again saying the sinner's prayer because I was terrified that I was going to wake up one morning and everyone would be raptured, and I was going to be left behind to face the stars falling onto the earth and the rivers turning to blood and all these things. And so I wrote out this
Mm.
little list of, I want to see an NFL game. I want to have a boyfriend. I want to, and I didn't tell anyone. I literally just wrote that down and I saved it, and I would check them off one at a time and going and praying to God, please let me live to be 20 so that I can experience these things. Because truthfully, heaven seemed kind of boring to me when my pastor would describe it. I'm like, oh, darn, we're just going to be singing hymns. And wow, that sounds like a long church service, right? Um, so I don't know if you can identify with any of that. Anyone that hasn't been in a church that pushes the end times probably will not understand that.
Yeah.
So terrified of the rapture.
I think I definitely can relate to it. I think I didn't feel the terror of it, and it was purely because of the pride issue of, I just felt like I know that I really believe, I know I've claimed him as my Lord and Savior. I fully, so eventually I saw enough fruit of the Spirit that I thought there's just no way. Like God wouldn't put it on my heart to just be in the Bible for hours and hours and hours a day. Like, that's the carnality would say, 5 minutes is enough. I'd be in the Bible for 4 hours at a time, and I'd want to be in it more and more and more. And I think now that's just a personality quirk. That's not spirituality. But I thought I'm pretty safe. And so the end times didn't scare me, but I was afraid for everybody else, obviously, that wasn't going to be in it. And I think the goal for me at that point was just, since you're saved and you are secure, be about the ministry, be about the mission, save, run a mission a yard from the gates of hell and save as many people as you can before it's too late. So I wasn't as fearful, but I was fearful of not being seen as someone that took the call seriously to be faithful to the ministry, to share the gospel and rescue people. And I definitely had that constant prayer, like, God, don't let me be just somebody else. I want to make a difference. But obviously that's a whole nother whole nother hodgepodge of messed up ideas.
But it's both of them, both of those thoughts boil down to fear, though. At the end of the day, you were maybe not scared for yourself, but you were scared for others.
Yeah.
And I was scared for myself. I don't know why exactly. I think because it was drilled into me, you're worthless. You're just a worthless person. And that's from the minute you're born, basically, you're told that. And I was also scared for my friends. One of my best friends was a little Presbyterian girl. And I just loved her. She was like a sister to me. Her family went to church. They were, I guess religious, but not according to my independent Baptist background. For asking my mom, I was probably 8 to 10 years old. And I said, Mom, is Tammy going to go to heaven? And she said, I don't think so, honey. She tries to be saved by works. She hasn't been saved. I don't think so. And I was just like, oh man, oh my gosh. And my mother was a nice person. It wasn't her talking, it was her belief that nobody but us was basically going to go to heaven. And those that fit in generally with our beliefs. You didn't actually have to go to our church, but you had a very narrow idea who was going. And a Presbyterian, no, they're not going to heaven, no.
Mm.
And that's the damage that does. I can't even believe, now that I'm a parent, I can't believe that someone would say that. But she was trying to get me to save Tammy, well, now you have to be a good witness. You just need to be out there. If you're not out there, who is going to tell her? Who is going to say it'll be your fault
Yeah.
if you don't tell her? So like you, as I got older and grew out of that, as I got to be 15, 16, 17, I did start going, maybe this rapture thing isn't going to happen. Maybe I'm going to make it to 30 or 35. Who knows? Maybe I'll even get married. And so then I did start looking at my friends. And so I started inviting everyone to youth group, boys that I dated. They all came to my youth group, just like you, because you felt like if I'm not a good witness, their soul is on me. And not only that, when I get to heaven, I'm not going to have everyone's going to know, because I'm not going to have the crowns and the jewels that other people might have.
Yeah.
So so not only are you scared for them, you're also worried, ooh, if I get to heaven and I'm in the back of the room, everyone's going to know
Yeah, and
that
I
I
think too, just
wasn't
that
good.
sense too that the grave disappointment on your Lord's face to say, like, yes, technically heaven's a place of no sadness, but there had to be some room for sadness where you would just know you could have done so much more. I remember that movie Schindler's List, at the end of it, where Schindler is just like beside himself, where he's like, I could have saved one
Yes.
more. What if I could have sold this watch and bought a few more people from the outcome that they faced, just a few more. And it was like he'd already done so much, but it's like, yeah, but you could have pushed yourself further. And to the masses, you couldn't have done too much, but to that one person that would have made the world a difference, eternal difference. And I had a tough time even like watching TV, because I thought, why would you not use this time to either witness or prepare to witness?
Oh,
It was really
yeah.
intense.
Yeah, that's the damage. I mean, this is the damage. People ask, what's the harm of religion? What's the harm of letting people believe what they want to believe? Because it ruins the life that you have now. And as far as we know, this is all we get. I am not going to say that I know what's in the afterlife. I don't know. But what I do know is this is what we have now.
Yeah.
And religion has ruined that for me to a large degree, a large part of my life. Okay, so we have this one life. This is the damage that religion does. And when I was a child, like I said, my parents were very into the end times. Although this is just interesting, because my mother had grown up Jewish, she actually was more progressive. My parents were more progressive than you would imagine. My parents allowed absolutely no racism in my home. There was none, ever. We were not to call names. My parents had friends that were Black, Jewish, Indian, you name it. My parents were very good that way. My parents also, my dad was a fireman. One of my dad's best friends, and remember, we're going back to the 70s and 80s, was a gay man. And my dad, they loved him. He was in our home. I'm sure they
It's
tried to
awesome.
witness to him. I'm not going to say I'm not privy to that. He had this really cool convertible, like this Batman convertible, and they let us take rides with him. My dad went into business. My dad had he owned a flower shop, very stereotypical. My dad went into business with this man. They loved him. He loved us. But I was a tomboy, liked to climb trees, liked to make things, liked sports. My mom was terrified that I was a lesbian. So instead of talking to me, sitting down and asking, do I like boys? Do I like girls? Instead of that, she took me, and I don't, for you younger people, you're not going to know who this is, but there was a Miss America named Anita Bryant. And she was probably a Miss America in the 50s, maybe. I don't know. You can look her up if you want to. But she had these crusades, and I believe they were called the Family Crusades or Keep the Family. I would have to look that up. I don't know the name of them, but essentially they were anti-gay. Essentially, they were very homophobic. And my mom took me to one. And I just remember looking around, I was just bewildered, like, what is going on? Why did my mom pick me out of? I have these other three sisters. My dad didn't go. It's me and my mom at this Anita Bryant crusade. And it wasn't till about a year later that it dawned on me, like, my mom thinks I'm a lesbian. That's what I think it is. Just from the hints, she would tell me things like, well, if you're gay, that you end up getting a lot of diseases. All these things that she would say to me, but she was too scared to say it outright. And that was the communication. It made her scared to communicate with her own daughter. It's just so bizarre to me, it just, as a parent now, it's just so bizarre that's how you would go about it.
Mm. And of course, the depths of that fear of, that was so offensive to God in their worldview.
Yes.
We had the same thing, and I don't remember people, like actual friends. I didn't know anybody that was gay as far as I knew growing up, but I just remember when you first learn about that's a thing, at least from the scriptures, that is a thing. And there's those stories of like the men of Sodom and Gomorrah that wanted to rape the angels and so forth, and the other stories. You do just kind of know about it, but you just think that is like the one of the worst abominations on the planet that humanity has ever come up with in our sinfulness. And yeah, you just, to me, it was just like the well was completely poisoned. You just knew that anybody that would even entertain that was so far from God, and anyone that was a friend of that person was, really close, even if they were themselves not homosexual, that they were themselves very much on a slippery slope of accepting horrific sin, as if it was okay. And so, yeah,
Right.
I definitely had that in the back of my mind. And I'm kind of glad that I didn't have to confront that situation in my real life, because I probably would have said or done things that I would have later regretted. So the sheltering kept me from putting my foot in my mouth and being very offensive about it when I was a Christian. But if I'd kept going, I'm sure eventually I would have said something, that was very wrong.
Ken, did you go to private Christian schools?
I went to private Christian school as well as I was homeschooled for part of my time, and then I went to a couple Bible colleges and a missionary school.
Yeah, you went to Bob Jones. Did you go to Bob Jones, you said?
Yeah, Bob Jones, Lancaster Bible College, and then New Tribes Mission School.
Okay, well, one thing about growing up in the rural West is that there was no private schools. There just was nothing.
Okay.
The closest public school was about 15 miles away, and I had to be bused. So that was not an option. So a saving grace in my life was literally being able to go to public schools. I was exposed to a much wider range of people, and I think that was helpful years down the road of me deconverting, because I do remember thinking, oh, Bob's going to hell, or my friend Mary, or this or that. And I remember thinking, but they're such nice people. They're such amazing, but they're Catholic, or they're Presbyterian, or they're nothing, or. So I think that was a saving grace. My mom, they allowed me to go to prom. I was able to have a relatively normal teenage lifestyle as far as that is concerned. They didn't hold me back from playing sports or prom or anything like that. But I will say, being in the public schools, because of what I was being taught on Sundays, and if the church doors were open, we were in. The Wells family was there. That Sunday morning, Sunday school, Sunday night, Wednesday night, Bible studies, vacation Bible school, summer camps. So other than public schools, this is where our world was. And it stopped me from thinking that small world. So when I did go to public school, I remember one time my teacher said, and the myth of Adam and Eve. And I thought, I think I got dizzy. I just was, I think my jaw literally, I just was, here I am 15, 16 years old. She says the myth of Adam and Eve. And I was aghast. I really, my world was like, someone thinks that this is a myth. And they're saying this to all these children, that these other kids, oh my gosh, oh my heavens. Ran home and told my mom, she's like, don't listen to anything that teacher says. Don't listen to her. So of course, what do? I just turn off the ears and I don't listen to anything else this teacher has to say. And I ended up getting a C or a D in that class because I wouldn't listen. And the other time is I was in biology class in public schools, and we all know how horrible that is. And my teacher started off saying, okay, this semester we're going to study the theory of evolution. And again, I had a blackout moment. I was like, I can't believe this. He was having us watch Carl Sagan, which, as you know, I mean, oh my heavens. So I went home and told my mom, and she said the same thing. Don't listen to everything that he says is a lie. And so here I am, the 16-year-old kid thinking, I know more than this educated teacher. He's wrong. The earth can't be millions of years old. This is all wrong. And so again, I got bad grades. But my parents thought that was okay because it didn't matter anyway. Nothing mattered to my parents. My grades didn't matter. What I want to do for a living didn't matter. My future didn't matter because we were going to be raptured soon. And that has haunted me to this day. That thinking of it doesn't matter because I made horrible decisions as a young woman, thinking it doesn't matter. That's why I say the church that I went to was almost a cult in the fact that they were teaching it doesn't matter what happens in the next 10 years because you're not going to be here.
Yeah.
Did everyone take that literally? No. Of course, I had kids that I grew up with that went to college and pursued careers and everything, but I'm the kind of personality like you, Tim. I took it seriously. Like I was one of the kids that took it seriously. And my parents did too, and they did not plan for my future. They did not plan for that. They did not save for college. They did not want me to go to college. They did not want me, they didn't even care really if I graduated from high school. I think they wanted me to graduate, but they really didn't care if I had good grades or if I learned a darn thing.
Yeah. I think I guess for some reason, luck of the draw or the way the cards fell, I had a little bit more of a freedom to, at least in my mind and my psychology, to do different things. I think one of them was, as much as this is a very minute point, I remember somebody expositing, what is it, Matthew 28, where the Great Commission, go ye therefore into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. Right. Yep. And somebody said, some preacher was preaching, he said, it's actually better translated, as you are going into the world, preach the gospel to every creature. So it isn't like you're here and now get out there as a missionary. It's just as you're going, as you're doing things.
Oh, really?
And
okay.
For some reason, whether that's, an accurate way to see it or not, that gave me this sense of like, okay, it isn't that God is saying you have to be a missionary, you have to go, and you have to leave everybody. You have to be certainly willing to if God calls you to, but you don't have to. But as you're going, as you're being a plumber, as you're a baker, whatever you're doing that you feel God is leading you to do, as you're doing those things, preach to everybody. And so I kind of had that freedom in a certain sense, but yeah, just the overwhelming knowledge. And I've said this before too, but on other interviews, but it really affected me when I mentally shifted gears to imagine people on fire. Like what I really struggled with, the idea of the purity culture, where you don't want to look at a girl and think, oh, wow, her curves are really appealing. And gosh, she's just so beautiful. My thought was, her curves are the facade. The reality is her spirit and her soul. You need to think of her not as a creature that is sexy, but as either someone who in the afterlife is going to be glorified like an angel by God because she's a child of God, or she's going to turn into a hideous monster like as if she were a demon, but she'll be on fire in hell. And so therefore you need to imagine the worst case. Think of that beautiful woman as on fire and think your job is not to admire her curves. Your job is to make sure she's saved. And that once I crisscross that, I literally look at people and see them on fire in my mind. And wow. I did it on purpose to try to stay focused on the gospel, And that obviously that's a whole other ball of wax and messing with your mind. But that was the way I dealt with the world, and the way that you kind of have to do other things besides the gospel. But it was like, as you're doing it, keep on seeing the reality of what's behind it. And I saw everything as like, it's just like a flimsy, like, those I think it's the Japanese rice paper where it's real flimsy, but sometimes they'll make like nice doors out of it in
Yes,
the
yes,
dojos or something. But
yes,
you could punch a hole right through it. I kind of
yes,
imagine reality is that way. Like, life is just this flimsy rice paper, and
yes,
someday the reality of eternality and the heaven and the afterlife is going to come
yes,
flooding in, and this
right.
rice paper facade will just drop. And it's like,
Hmm.
you got to have eyes to see a little bit further than the rice paper in front of you. And that was my driver for decades.
Yes, I completely, that makes total sense. I never thought of it that way, but I guess I thought of it as the rice paper too. It's just this little thing, little facade, and that's not the important thing. The important thing is what's on the other side of that. But
Yeah.
as a woman, our purity culture's a little different. I was taught that it was my responsibility to make sure that boys didn't sin. Like, I don't even know how that makes any sense. I really don't. But I remember, you reading, they would read Proverbs that the good woman dresses modestly and so on. And if you dress, I am a curvy woman. So if I would dress in stuff that was too tight, oh, what might happen? You're going to cause him to sin. And so I mean, this went into my adulthood. Oh, is this shirt too tight? Does my bust look too big? Why do I mean now? Like, who cares if my bust is too big? If you don't like it, if you're offended, look away. How is that my problem? So I didn't dress comfortably or felt comfortable in my own body because of purity culture. So for men, it does a damage in one way, and for women, it damages you the other way. But even to this day, it's still, I don't know that you can ever get rid of that. I'm not sure that, because I was in it for so long, I don't know that it will ever go away. But I'm trying to get better. I'm trying to get better and grow out of that because I know it's just nonsense. And the purity culture might do, I mean, the end time stuff did a lot of damage to me, but the purity culture might have done more long-term damage. Made me codependent. It made me worried about other people's feelings more than mine.
Mm.
um, Religion, the whole thing made me a codependent. What does my mom think? Is my dad happy? What are boys thinking? It's always, what is it about other people, never about me. Not saying that I needed to be self-centered or selfish, but when you don't even know your own feelings, I got to the point a few years ago, and that's what brought me out of Christianity, was realizing that I couldn't even feel stuff. Like, I stopped being able to feel things and not even knowing what my own thoughts were because it was for everybody else. Does that make sense?
It does.
How
Yeah.
that could go to that,
And
you know?
especially in the biggest picture, kind of wrapping all that together, the biggest codependency is you're concerned constantly about what is God thinking about you too.
Yes.
Is he
Yes.
happy? Is he,
Yes.
and the fact
What
that
is
he
God
can
thinking?
see inside your head, where it's not just like for everyone else you want to please them, but you can put on a show of sorts if you have to. But for God, there is no show. He can see
No.
everything. And so you're constantly in danger of falling short and being judged and feeling shamed.
Well, and you feel like you have no privacy because somebody's constantly looking and judging. And now, that isn't to say, Tim, that I didn't feel like God was my father and Jesus was my friend. It's not that. I didn't live in fear of God. In fact, I really felt like I had a very loving relationship with Jesus. I just felt like he was my protector and I could tell him everything. So I'm not going to say that I was always fearful. That I did have a, I can have, I remember going to Bible camp and having an amazing time, even though they burned my records. One year we went and they made us bring our secular music, and they did burn our records. My poor little cousin, they burned his, I don't know, I think he had like some CB. Back in the day, truckers would do, they had like CBs that they would talk, and he had some country album or something that was about, I remember my poor little cousin crying because they burned his record. But anyway, I still had a great time. I'm not going to say that it was all horrible. It was not. I had some wonderful relationships. I had some great times. But is still insidious long-term damage, no matter how much fun I was having at camp riding horses and having a good time with my friends. So
In
um,
some ways you don't see, I think, the damage until later, because like when you're in it, it really does feel like it's okay. And it reminds me a lot of the way we would talk about a human to human relationship of like with a narcissist, where you might feel like, oh my gosh, this person is so amazing. They're love bombing me, they take care of me. It's so that
right.
like the highs are so high, it's so amazing.
Yes.
But then when you're out of
Yes.
it later, you're like, holy shit, this person manipulated the hell out of me. This
Yes.
person was playing a game. This was not healthy. And even the times that I felt like they were healthy, they were actually, there was so much toxicity woven in that it very much taints the good part of it if there was one. And yeah, I totally agree though. When you're in it, you feel like this is part of the angst of me fighting sin and getting closer to God. And it's part of how the journey works.
Absolutely. And that I got to remember that because that ties into the end of my deconversion story, the love bombing, the how wonderful it is. So I want to try and remember that and get back to it. But I want to do tell you just the very beginnings of my deconversion. My deconversion took decades. It was not sudden. I know people, I've known Christians that went suddenly. This is just doesn't make any sense. And they're boom, they're gone, right? Like I couldn't do that. But the very beginning of my deconversion, when I was a teenager, my mom got sick and died. She died rather young. She died when she was 42. So she was very young when she died. And my father drank a lot. And when she died, he really drank and he abandoned us. He essentially abandoned the home. And so it was me and my sisters. He had a roof over our head, but that was it. He was gone. He was drinking. He didn't want anything to do with us, essentially. And I remember thinking, what did my mom do that was so bad that he would kill her? Because remember, you're thinking this. He didn't rapture her. I grew up, we're going to be raptured. And my mom and dad both said, we're the first generation that isn't going to have to die. They drilled it. My mom, they said, we're not going to die. We're not going to die. I don't have to die. And then my mom dies when I'm still a young woman, very young. And my youngest sister was 10. So we had, like 10 to 20.
Wow.
That was how old we were. And I started thinking, okay, this doesn't make any sense. She's dead. She told me she would never die. My dad abandons us. And this was the seeds. This was the very, very beginnings when I was 20 that started kicking me off. But still, I couldn't let go. And I still was too scared to question. But I did stop going to church at that point in time. I actually did because I was angry. And I'm going to tell you something that's shocking, and my sisters will back me up on this. After the funeral, after the funeral was done and the church folks brought the food in the first week or two, um, after that, we never heard from anyone in that church again. Never. I've never, ever, they did not call to see if I was okay. They just threw us to the wolves. And I
Wow.
have heard other Christians tell me that they have had that same experience. Once you're not a part of that anymore, oh well, they kind of just let you go your own way. And I'm still bitter. I can't imagine adults do it. And again, we're a tiny church in a tiny town, and they just gone. And these were the first things that just got me ticking, but I couldn't let
Hmm.
go. Jesus was still my friend. I was still saved. Once saved, always saved. I figured unless I said the words, I reject you, Jesus, I reject you, God, that there was no sin that was not forgiven. We grew up with that no, I could go on a murdering rampage as long as I had said the sinner's prayer. You were good.
Hmm.
The only thing that you could do, and I don't know if, I'm not sure what kind of church you grew up in, but we only had the one unpardonable sin, and that was rejecting Jesus.
Gotcha. I was
And I
close
guess
to
that's pretty
Baptist.
common.
Yeah, I think we would have seen the unpardonable sin as blaspheming the Holy Spirit, but effectively it's the same thing. Yeah, rejecting Jesus the way the spiritual authorities in Judea did at the time that Jesus was there. So yeah, two sides of the same coin. But can I just ask what well, you mentioned that your when your mom passed, your kids, the other kids were like 10 and so forth. Did you have to play like a mothering role to
Yes.
them, or how did that work?
Yes. Yeah, I did. because my dad refused to stand up and be a parent. He just couldn't. He couldn't. My parents had a very traditional marriage. My mom did all the home. My dad went out and worked. He was a busy fireman. He had another business, like I mentioned before. And and then on his off time, he was drinking or out with his friends or whatever. I feel like my dad couldn't take care of us. I don't think he was equipped to take care of us. And so he just said, well, Laurentia can take care of all the kids, and I'm just going to go my merry way. And I did not understand why God would put this on me, why he killed my mother, why my Christian dad was doing this, made the Christian family that I had put everything into. I had given everything that I knew how. I was there when every time the door was open, I was there, and I was abandoned. And this was the very beginnings of me just questioning God. But as you know, Tim, that questioning God is the worst thing you can do. Who are you to question God? His plans are not our plans. His ways are higher than our ways. And somehow some good is going to come out of this. Now, how good could possibly come out of a mother getting sick and dying and leaving her children to an alcoholic who abandons them? I have no idea. And to this day, I can tell you that not one scrap of good came out of that. Zero. Nothing good came out of that. We struggled for years, for decades. My family struggled, and we're still not ever going to be completely whole because of that.
So heartbreaking. And I'm sure that from his perspective, he was also in unbelievable amounts of pain. And I know that, it's drilled into us that the idea that Christianity is or is not true is not based on our experience, because people are going to fail us, people are going to hurt us.
Right.
But at some point you have to say, yeah, but we're not just saying Christians hurt us, Christians failed us. What we're saying is God didn't show up. Like we're not necessarily saying this one person hurt us and therefore Christianity is false. Of course, that's a step way too far. We can't base a worldview on one person treating us nice or not. But what you're saying is behind the scenes, there's this whole picture. When does God ever show up and just say, I want you to know I am here and I'm showing up big, and I've told you that I have created the whole universe, and I can also raise the spiritually dead, or people that don't care about me, they're all about sin. I can make them into people that want to go to the ends of the earth to preach the gospel and live for me. I can do all these amazing things in the gospels. I can, heal people's blindness. I can do all these things. And you're like,
Right.
That's great that I hear all these things that you can do in all these places, but I'm asking you, can you do something in my life? Not to get rich. I'm not trying to make you into Santa Claus, but can you do something to at least make my life safe and healthy on the most basic levels? And over, the answer is just crickets. He never shows up. And it's so, and even the times when it seems like he does, you can really analyze that and say, that's just people waking up, like an alcoholic that was beating the shit out of his wife, and he's spending all his money on drugs, and he suddenly gets healthy. You're like, yeah, but he might have also just realized, dude, you're throwing your life away. Get it together. Right. That doesn't necessarily equate to God. And you're like, I can never pinpoint and say God showed up, and it's clearly there's no other explanation than God did it, and it's massive, and everyone knows it. It's like, nope, he either doesn't show up or it's just a human explanation.
Here's the funny thing. Here is the messed up thinking that I had, though. So I have this experience with this extremely dysfunctional family that I had. And all of this, God does not show up for any of this for me as a child dealing with all of this, or a very young adult. But I remember being in Bible study years later when I was in the Methodist church. We had a Bible study. I just had my first son. I gained a little weight. And so I was going to a Christian weight loss. And this was do you know who Gwen Shamblin is?
I don't think so.
Do you know? Okay. She's if you don't know who Gwen Shamblin is, you should really watch this thing, the documentary on Netflix about her. She was insane. But anyway, I was going to the Way Down workshop. So if any of you know about this, I was going there. And she would say, there's no such thing as a coincidence. There's only God instances, God instances. So I went to this Bible study, trying to lose a few pounds, go home, and I'm driving down the street, and I'm like, man, I am hungry. So I pulled into this little place. They have them in Florida. They're called Crystals. And essentially they make little sliders, like White Castle sliders. And I went through the drive-through and I'm like, I know I shouldn't be doing this. I really shouldn't be doing this. And I get up to the window and they say, oh, I'm sorry, we ran out. We have no food. We just totally ran out. I said, look at God. It's a God instance. He's saving me from buying these stupid sliders. And I held on to that. That's where God showed up for me. Not when my mom died, not for my mom, not for my dad, not for me struggling with my sisters, but he didn't want me to buy some hamburgers. But I thought that, Tim, I actually thought that. And these were the little things that kept me going back for more. As stupid, I look back now and I just go, what could I be thinking? They just ran out of food. And does God care that I weighed 141 pounds instead of 125? What God would care about that when there's a 5-year-old dying of cancer in the hospital down the street? And he's worried about me buying a hamburger because I'm a couple of pounds overweight? It doesn't make any sense. It's your critical thinking skills are gone. That's what growing up in that religion did to me. I had no critical thinking skills going, there's a child somewhere dying. And God is worried about my hamburger. His priorities are messed up.
I think one of the craziest examples, or two of them, are the when you watch a football game and somebody gets a touchdown and they bow their knee, like, God, I give all the glory for helping me to catch that ball and get around the defense. But then also the even crazier one of like, God, please help me to get a parking space. I know we all use that, and as a cliche, is like, how stupid is it? But you do get this sense that whether you've heard that specific one or not, that's the way we think. And I think I can kind of understand it in some ways, because as a Calvinist, which is where I landed at the end, you do see God as sovereign over everything, and you do question this: how involved is he? And if there's any sense in which he's not involved, is that like a outcome of chaos? And does that make sense? Would God have any sense of like, I'm going to orchestrate most of your life, but not all of it, and the rest of it is just like, flip a coin, who knows what's going to happen? And so as a Calvinist, I kind of saw it more like it's a good thing that God is so involved. But yeah, when you compare it and say, okay, well, if God is involved in my life with these little teeny things, then like, why isn't he saving the kids who are dying? And then some of the biggest things too that helped me to realize, just that there was a bigger picture to this, was the sense that the gospel that I was so clinging to, that did actually feel like it was changing me, was not really changing other people. And so the bizarreness that you're talking about, the lack of critical thinking skills, but also the lack of the power of the gospel, because I had so many people in my life that they were exposed to Christian radio and to pastors and to Christian friends and prayer Bible studies. And I was like, you're living like the devil, like not in the sense of like drugs or something, but just like, you're just not very nice. You're nasty people. You're snarky and snippy. And a lot of those things, the cognitive dissonance, just eventually it's all different. It's amazing how it's different for every little story we come across on our channels, but it's like, it all kind of it adds up to the same direction. These things just don't add up. There's just no way that there's something divine about this. And on that note, could I ask, one of the biggest things that for a lot of us comes into the equation at that point is when you don't feel like, number one, God is showing up, but also that there's just nothing divine about this whole plan. That goes a lot back to the Bible of like, yeah, well, my life can be weird and messed up and this can fall short, but maybe God will explain it in the afterlife. But the one thing I cling to is the word of God stands forever. It is perfect. Like, where were you with the Bible itself, and just what was your relationship with God through the Bible and with the Bible itself in all this?
Tim, I didn't know the Bible. I thought I knew the Bible. And I'll tell you, the reason why I'm doing this YouTube channel is because I was pulled into the biggest con that has ever been foisted on mankind, because I didn't know the Bible. I thought I knew the Bible because I would read the Bible, but I depended on someone who I thought was smarter than me and more educated than me, and they lied. I really have a problem with pastors because I either they don't know the Bible themselves or they're lying. Sometimes they lie by omission. But I would get, do you remember the Daily Bread? We would get the Daily
Oh
Bread,
yeah.
and they're out of Proverbs, they're out of Psalms, they're out of the Gospels, out of Romans. But boy, they sure don't have anything out of Numbers or Leviticus in there. Sometimes Isaiah, maybe a little thing in Isaiah. And I would read the Bible, and I remember clearly being in church and reading about God slaying the firstborn of the Egyptians. And I was a firstborn. And I was like, oh, that is just awful. And I remember thinking that. And then I said, well, I'm a girl, so I would have been okay. So, because I was a girl. But that did stick back here. And I was like, why would God have to kill an innocent child and the firstborn of even the livestock? And so there was things like that. But honestly, I just thought, well, smarter people than me have studied this. And I'm just going to, my pastor says this. And, my pastor says this about this awful thing. My mother told me that the reason they had slaves back in that time, because that was a different time and God was dealing with primitive people and he just was bringing them around, which is just laughable, but you just believe this stuff. You just believe. I didn't know what the Bible said. That's going to be my honest answer. I didn't know. I thought I knew. I had no clue. And I don't think most Christians do know. Because if you do know, you're probably not going to be a Christian anymore. Or you're going to
Yeah.
lie to yourself. Or you're going to lie to others. Because the only way to make it make sense is to lie.
Hmm. And I
I
think,
was taught. Were you taught that it was infallible, perfect? Nothing could be wrong with it.
yeah, I was. And I think that was what took me so long when I did go through what you're just describing of where you see these weird passages that don't make sense, is that I felt that internal compulsion to just say, there's got to be some explanation that makes more sense, like what you said, maybe your mom explaining slavery, or the thing that I went back to a lot was just the idea that when God judges people, when he says this group of people needs to die, that was the part of me that said, oh, I don't know, why did God have to kill those people? That was part of my lack of understanding the pure
Yes.
holiness of God. That if I understood
Yes.
the gravity of sin and what it had done to his holiness and his plan and what how he can't allow it in his presence. And if you could just glimpse his holiness for 1 second, 1 millisecond, you would suddenly say, holy smokes, God, you are right to judge. And when you judge someone, whether it's a little bit or it's a complete slaughter, when you say that person dies, no matter how it happens, you are right. You are righteous. Will not the judge of the earth do right? And so I've told this before in other interviews, but I remember my pastor of one of the last churches I went to, he was talking about a story where he was counseling a woman who had just lost her baby, not through miscarriage, but the baby had been born and then died. And he told this woman, this was a private conversation, of course, but then he told this to the congregation later. He said, I told this woman that, ma'am, you're never going to really get to a healthy place with your theology and your healing unless you understand this from God's perspective. And he said, ma'am, your baby deserved to die. And he said, everyone does. Like the fact that we're still talking and breathing this minute is a grace of God. You deserve to be dead. I deserve to be dead. Your baby is no different. And he told that to this woman. And to my shame at that time, I kind of internally nodded and said, I'm cringing, but yeah, nobody deserves the breath. God is the one that judges us. And that's where I think the white hot holiness issue kept me in it for a lot longer. And it's like Chris Hitchens used to say something about, I forget how the quote goes, but something about if you want to get good people to do really bad things and to kind of justify it in their heads, you got to get religion there, because they will do these horrible things and they will think that they're right. And
Yes.
what a scary place to be. And
Yes.
I've having been there myself.
Yeah, it is scary because if you really think it's true, if you really, really believe that, what won't you do? What won't you do if you think that God is telling you this? And think about someone, you and I hopefully are normal, but think about someone with mental illness. Why did Andrea Yates drown her children? Because she honestly thought they needed to die before they became to the age of accountability. She actually thought that. She was not a murderer, but her theology and her mental illness mixed together told her to do this. And I believe that. I don't know why she's in jail. I don't know if she's in, I think she went to jail. I hope that she got out, went to a psychiatric and deconverted and understood, but you can see how that can become an absolute toxic stew. And so again, that's what I say. What's the harm of religion? When people tell me that, now I'm going to go back a little bit because I ended up marrying a Catholic man. He grew up devoutly Catholic. Catholicism has its own issues, but I'm going to say this about it. He doesn't seem to have a lot of the baggage that I do. He comes from a little different place. But when we got married as a Baptist, I was like, oh, hell no, I'm not going to be a Catholic because they might as well have been Satan worshipers. And he was like, oh, hell no, I'm not being a Baptist. We could not. So we decided to go to the Methodist church together. We figured that this would be a very good place to be. And when I got to the Methodist church, the first thing I did is I signed up for I think it's maybe 24 weeks. It's a very long Bible study called Disciple. And they tell you all about their theology, everything you need to know about the Methodist church, you learn in Disciple. And essentially, it was such a relief to me because I did not have to believe anymore that Adam and Eve were real people. I did not have to believe that Noah's Ark actually sailed. I didn't have to believe almost anything that I didn't want to in the Bible. If I didn't want to think it was true and that it was God telling a little parable, I could. The one thing that they said is that they likened it to the pastor that I was taking it with likened it to a baseball field, the diamond. And he said, you just have to stay in these lines. You have to believe in the Trinity. You have to rely on Jesus for your salvation, and maybe a couple of other things. Oh, you had to believe in the resurrection, and maybe something else. I can't remember now. But as long as you believe like these 4 pillars, and say really everything else is out in the outfield. So, and I was like, amazing. They allow you to drink. I could go to R-rated movies. They're really much more liberal. And I raised my children in that, and they're a lot more friendly towards the gay community, which I really appreciated. And so I ended up staying there for a long, long time. For 20, maybe close to 20 years, I was in the Methodist church.
Can I ask real quick before you tell what happens next? You going back to when you met your husband, was it a concern that you all were not equally yoked in a sense?
Absolutely.
How did you
Absolutely.
get past that and not cut it off from proceeding?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. It was a concern. And I grew up, this is a horrible thing to say. I hope no one is offended by this, but this is just the reality of when I was growing up. I was taught that the Roman Catholic Church was a little mix between Satan and the Roman Emperor Constantine, that Satan and the Roman Emperor made this, and it was satanic. I want to say the Pope was it was almost like Satan worshiping. So in fact, my parents really would not even allow me to go into a Catholic church. They were so convinced that the Catholic Church was basically an agent of Satan. Now, I had grown past that. By the time I met my husband, I was 29. I had grown past that, and I had deep concerns about the reality of Adam and Eve. I had some very deep, obviously, the rapture hadn't happened. So I was already kind of loosening up, but I was no way going to be Catholic. There was no way. And he was very disenchanted with the Catholic Church himself. He had gone through a divorce and they had made it a living hell for him. He had to pay money to get out of this, even though his wife had left him. He had to pay money. He was just he was done with the Catholic Church. But as a Catholic, he had been taught the same thing about Baptists, that we were basically an agent of Satan, right? So this is just the funny, and we kind of chuckled about it. We said, well, what church can we go to? So we visited Episcopalian, Lutheran, Methodist, and we just happened to find a really awesome church near Orlando that we went to. We loved the pastor, and the people were so nice. And so that's kind of where we settled. We joined the church, and we were there for many years.
But I mean, did you think he was saved? Did he have a profession of clear faith in Christ as his Lord and Savior and no other way to salvation?
By that time, okay, no, I did not think he was saved. No, I did not think he was saved. But the Methodists don't believe in being saved. That's not what they believe. They don't believe, there's no altar calls. You don't say the sinner's prayer. So when that was explained to me and I started believing that, I realized that being saved was ridiculous. I thought that was primitive and ridiculous. Methodists believe that you are a Christian, not through works either. It's not through like you do good works and you get brownie points. It's more the fruit of your relationship with Christ. It's a relationship. It is not a moment in time where you are saved. There's no such, it's a relationship. You start your relationship with Jesus, and that's how you're saved, although they don't call it that. So they're a little more strict on, when you're a Baptist, you go to church or don't go to church. It doesn't matter, just say it's once saved, always saved. It's not like that there. It's not saved, once saved, always saved. You definitely have to participate and do your penance. I don't know. I guess that's what you'd call it.
Gotcha. And did you have at least an agreement though that you would raise your kids together to go to a Baptist kind of church, or like what, or
No,
at least some kind of Baptistic theology more, that they had to, your children
yeah.
needed
I
to
mean, I
get
wanted
saved?
to be Protestant. They believed in the Methodists. We had them baptized into the Methodist Church. They do infant baptisms, which was a
Okay.
no-no. When I was a Baptist, you did not do Baptist. I was baptized when I was like 12, even though I was saved at 5. They had to wait till the age of accountability. That's what they called it. I had to make sure that I was doing this, But like I said, the Methodist Church does infant baptisms. But I wouldn't allow my kids to be baptized. I would not allow that because I was still like, no, I don't believe in that. So my kids were actually older. I waited till they were 12, and that was fine. They did a reconfirmation, and they were baptized into the Methodist Church, and I raised them there. And my kids loved it. They did the youth groups and the Bible camps and everything, and I just thought it was amazing. I got to be honest. I was just, oh, this is amazing.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, when there's a lack of the ultra toxicity, it can be a relatively benign experience in some ways, especially if they're not pushing hellfire and anti-LGBTQ stuff. With that background, though, at that point, you're saying sounds like you were kind of coasting, if I could use that word. You're kind of coasting your relationship with Christ. You're not as on fire or intense as you would have been perhaps before,
Oh,
but you've
no.
settled into a good spot. What moved you, like, why didn't you stay in that spot? Because it can be comfortable for some people in that level of, call it progressive Christianity for some people. What kept you moving so that wasn't the place you stayed?
Yes, it is. It was. I felt so sophisticated. Like I don't have to believe in Adam and Eve. So it really worked for me for a long time because I was addicted to the feeling. I was addicted to church, even though I really was having doubts. I was just doubting. Things would run through my mind. Like, I just don't know if I believe this anymore. I would read parts of the Bible, and my pastor, the last pastor that I had, was an amazing apologist. Even though he was Methodist, he could twist, you'd have a question, he could twist that around. And so I would ask these questions in Sunday school, in disciple class, and and I would go, oh, okay. Oh, all right. And I would say along, and then I might go, but still, it really doesn't make sense. So what happened is I had a personal crisis in my life. And I figured out that I was a codependent, and I had a situation with one of my sisters that just brought me to my knees. It really brought me to my knees. And I realized I have a codependency problem. And so here's what I did. I picked up a Dr. Phil book. Now, I'm not shilling for Dr. Phil. I don't even really like him all that well, to be honest with you. He's okay. But I picked up this Dr. Phil, and I think it was called Life Strategies. And I said, I'm going to go through this thing, and I'm going to see what Dr. Phil has to, because it was recommended on Amazon. And one thing that he said that I will never forget it, and I'm so grateful to him. He said, you need to write down everything that you believe with your relationships, with your faith, with your money, with your career. You need to write it down, and you need to figure out why you believe it. Why do you believe what you believe? And you just spend days on this. Every conception that you have in your mind, why do you believe that? And when I got to the religion, yeah, I could write it. Why am I a personal trainer? Why am I married? But when I got to why do I believe in my faith? You know what I came up with? Because my parents told me. Because my parents told me. I have no reason to believe this. I have not even one reason to believe. I've never seen any evidence in my life outside of God preventing me from getting a hamburger one time. I have nothing to hang my hat on. The Bible is full of horrific things. I let that slide because I thought people that were smarter than me. So I decided I am going to stop going to church for 6 weeks. And this was so incredibly painful and hard for me. I can't even tell you how painful this was. I was addicted to it. It was everything to me. Everything. It was my relationships. It was my social life. It's my emotional support. It was my mental health. And I said, you're not going to go. And instead, you're going to study on Sunday mornings the Bible. You're going to go on YouTube and see what you can find. And you're going to find out if this is true or not once and for all. You're going to do this. And I walked away after 6 weeks and I said, I don't believe this anymore. I don't believe it. And I can't keep giving my time, my money, and my energy to something that I don't believe. I have to stop. And I was so scared to tell my husband. And I did. I said, I'm not going back. And he said, oh, I haven't believed in this for a long time. He was just,
Well,
said it. He goes, that's okay. I haven't believed in this for a long time. He goes, I just go because it's fun. We get donuts on Sunday morning and we go out with people and have a good time. And I'm making light of it. I'm laughing, but it was the most incredibly painful thing that I ever did was walking away. It was the hardest thing that I've ever done. That includes burying my mother. That was worse than that. Horrific, horrible. And I started watching the Atheist Experience. I started watching The Thinking Atheist. When I was young, we had Madeline Murray O'Hare and Carl Sagan. These were our atheists, and she was really a horrible person. I'm not going to sugarcoat her. If anyone wants to research her, she was one of the first big atheist people out there, and she was kind of a horrible person. And so you just think, oh, atheist, yuck. I remember hearing people were atheists, and I was like, an atheist, they're worshiping Satan. How horrible is this? And I just realized that's me. I don't believe this anymore. And I walked away. And the last time I went to church, my sons were still in it. My son was in college. And for Father's Day 2017, he asked us to go to his church. And I said, yes, we will go. It's Father's Day. And we sat down, and his pastor started the sermon. And he said, nothing that you can do is ever deserving of God's love. You're not good enough. You've never been good enough. You never will be good enough. Only Jesus can save you. And right then and there, I said, I am so tired of being told. I realized right then and there, I had been told since the day I was born that I wasn't good enough, that I was a horrible person. And that was it. That was, if nothing else had done it, I just sat there the whole time going, I am so sick of being told that because I'm a human being with normal human being tendencies, that I am worthless. And I never went back. I've never been to a church since then.
hmm. I was almost half expecting you to say you got up and started shouting back at him.
No, I was good. I just sat there.
I
I
think
just
there's a
sat there.
part of us that can all remember times like that where we wish we had spoken up, just to, if not for nothing else, just to give the other people in the congregation a sense that maybe they're not the only ones questioning it. So when you, with the context of your mom's early passing, how did that relate to your expectations of the afterlife? And had you kind of been banking on the idea of, like, despite some of the ways in which there was some, maybe some hard memories there, that ultimately there was this beautiful bliss that you're going to see her again. It's going to be no tears. How did you process that and heal from it?
Well, it's true because I know Christians to this day. I know I have someone in my life who she says, I can't bear the thought of never seeing my father again. And that's why she hangs on. I think there's more Christians than we probably know of that are hanging on for these reasons. They can't bear the thought. They've lost a child, they've lost a parent, and they can't bear the thought. And that is horrible. I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say, wow, I will never see my mother again. I'm not going to see my father is also passed. He died fairly young himself, actually. He died not too long after, too many years. So we are orphans. Me and my sisters, we were all orphaned fairly young. I will never see him again. I have friends that have died, two best friends that have died. I will never see them again. Is that fun? Is that painful. It's incredibly painful, but it's reality. Just because I go to church and want to believe that, it's not reality. And I feel like the Methodist Church, although they're not as toxic in the ways that we talked about, they kept me clinging on to that. The magical thinking, like they're good in some ways. I'm not gonna, they are much better than what I came from, but they still had me clinging on to the magic of it all, making me think that I was worthless. And if I only do these things, I will see my mom again. I will see my dad again. It's all going to be amazing. It's not true. It's just not true. And it's a con. It's a con. And I was lied to. And I'm angry that I was lied to. I was conned and I was lied to.
Yeah. I love how the way you just described that with being lied to. I think as a flip side of that coin of being lied to is also just the idea of being passively lied to, if I can speak correctly, passively lied to by way of being deprived of relevant information. Like I think for a lot of people, they don't even think to ask the right questions. But if a pastor, for example, were to ever voluntarily do what I'm about to say, it would be like, wait, what? What did he just say? And the balls would start rolling in your head, but you don't ever have this experience, so you don't start going down this road unless you stumble on YouTube channels like the ones you mentioned and listen to Carl Sagan and et cetera. But the idea of like, where did this whole thing come from? And there was
Yes.
always this implication of like, well, God guided the stories. He guided the men who wrote this. He guided
Yes.
the men who
Yes.
preserved it. And like, once you step back, you're like, well, wait a second. Where did these stories actually come from? Like, what was the first, like, what, when a police or detective or something has evidence, they have to, like, once they say they're collecting like blood samples or something, and or hair from some crime scene, they have to not just document that they've got it, but they need to document where it's been. So in order that if it's been, down the hall with this detective, then you need to know who's touched this
Right.
evidence.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so that trail needs to be very clear, because you don't want someone tainting it. And when you
Right.
apply that to Christianity and Judaism in the Bible, you think, how do you know where this Bible came from? And how do you know that it wasn't tainted? How do you know that somebody that was like, well, you know what? I know it doesn't say anything about gay people, but I really don't like them. So I'm going to add that verse. And the other person says,
Yes.
I really think men are so
Yes.
much more powerful than women. So even though it
Yes.
doesn't say women keep quiet in the churches, I'm going to add that because I really think women
Yes.
should be quiet in the churches. How do you know? There's no way
You
to know
don't.
at this point. And that, you could ask that question about almost every verse in the Bible. But when you realize that there were books that went in and went out, Enoch was considered scripture for the first couple hundred years, and then
Yes.
Enoch fell out. Then Revelation and James weren't in, and Hebrews was on the rocks, and then they got eventually put back in. It's like,
Yep.
well, how do you know that they were supposed to be in? And the whole question of there's not four gospels, there's at least like 60 or 70, but we know that there may have been hundreds of them originally. Well, where are the other hundreds? I mean, we know we've got like some of them, but where are the other hundreds? And why did we land on just these four? Why? And what about what's within the four? Why are there 9 different endings of Mark that we have? And are there really 50 different endings of Mark? There's just all these questions. But then when you weave in the idea of like, well, apart from the actual physical texts and the canon question, where did the stories within them come from? And of course, as Christians, we grew up saying, well, they were just godly men recording history. But then when you
Right.
get into the comparative mythology, you're just like, oh, wait a second, they might have been copying from other earlier stories.
Yeah,
And
you
once you
think?
start going down this Pandora's box, you're like,
Yes.
I don't even care like what's like before you even say what is in this verse and what is in that chapter. Before you dig in that deeply, you have to say, no matter what's in it, does this make sense? Does this look divine? And it just and why are all these miracles that are so amazing? Why have they stopped? Why, the minute the cameras and video is invented, there's no more
Yes.
miracles that we can verify. Like that
Yes.
just doesn't make sense. And it falls apart. It falls apart.
Well, and I don't know about your church that you grew up in, but my church, and I know why they did it now, is they made us read the King James Bible. Who in the heck could read the King James Bible? Well, now I know why, because you can't read the King James Bible. That's why we read the King James Bible, because you just can't make heads or tails out of it. The simplest of sense. Verily I say unto thee, you're like, okay. So now I know And besides that, now I know that the King James version is a horrible version, a horrible translation anyway.
I think too, just with the King James, because I grew up with that too. I think there's this air of authority and respectability of like, oh, this big, lofty, bombastic language. Like, oh, this the language of God and the language of court, a king. And it's like, just because it sounds more elevated, just because it's, Shakespearean or something, that doesn't give it more respectability. And yeah, between the
No.
all that stuff, it's messed up. But I did want to maybe bring us to a close to ask a couple final questions. I want to talk at the very end about the YouTube channel. But before we get to that one, could you just tell us how has the healing been? You've talked about, the anger and the frustration over being lied to. How is the healing going at this point now that you're removed? And number one, I should ask how long ago was your deconversion, but how has it been going since that time frame?
Yeah, I stopped in 2017, so it's been years. And as you know, you go through sadness, you go through anger, you go through just these waves. It's just this way. It's like just being on a tossy turvy roller coaster or something of emotions. And you know what? For a while, I felt embarrassed. Like I didn't want to tell any of my Christian friends that I had left. And so for a while, for a long time, I didn't tell Christian friends that didn't live by me. I was scared of Christians. I was scared of apologists. I was scared of my former pastor. I did not want to talk to him because I did not feel equipped. I just knew that was wrong. But if he had come at me, if a really good Christian apologist had come at me in the first 2 years, I could not have had answers. I could not justify myself. So I kind of hid. And my healing has been, like I said, a roller coaster. My kids were, my husband was fine. Both of my sons were very angry. They were upset. It was very difficult for them. Now they're out. They're not involved anymore. So I was happy that, and I did not pressure them. I don't pressure in my real life. I don't go around just vomiting information about atheism. I don't do that. I'm very quiet. I don't even want to talk about it. But just over time, when I would say things to my kids, they just started going, yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
Mm.
It just
Well,
doesn't. And they're out.
that's a perfect segue to your channel, which is in some ways, that dynamic of it just doesn't make sense. So let's talk about it. What inspired you to go from, privately talking with your loved ones about why it didn't make sense to being more public, and what's the experience been like as a YouTuber, and what's the backlash been, and also maybe what are your hopes and dreams in terms of your influence and impact?
So I have this very extremely, the most conservative fundamentalist that you can imagine. She's just incredible. And her and I have been butting heads now for years, just questioning me. She's questioning me. And so one day I just said, I just need to get this out somewhere. If I can help one person, one person, I don't have any illusions of being some rock star or anything like that. But if I can share my anti-beliefs, I guess you want to call them, I don't know what you want to say. I don't like to call myself an atheist because of just the horrible connotations it had when I was a kid. But I just want to say an educator, if I can talk to one person, right? One person, that's it. That's my goal. That's my dreams. If I can help one person not go through the 50 years that I wasted, I mean, I can't even tell you. Me and my husband, I wish we would go through our books and see how much money we gave. The money alone, right? What good could that have done? $50,000, 60,000, I don't know. $100,000 we gave to the church. I have no idea. Thousands of what good could we have done with that? The time, the energy. If I can save one person, I'm good. I'm good.
I love it. What's the reception been like so far? Have you had some good feedback?
Yeah, of course. I mean, of course you're going to get, pushback. I'm going to say this. Remember how I told you when I was a young woman and dealing with my sisters and nobody in the church stood up? Well, you know what? When I left the Methodist church, that's pretty much the same thing. I had one guy that was in my Sunday school class that actually emailed me a couple of times, oh, we hope you come back. The pastor, he never even called. I was Facebook friends with him, and he ended up moving away shortly after we quit going. He ended up going to a pastorate somewhere else, and I heard from him briefly, but he actually is deceased now. But I heard from him, but he just really didn't question me much. And they kind of my Christian friends that I thought were my besties, they've kind of abandoned me. I mean, I don't know if that's been your experience, Tim, but I've kind of been abandoned.
Yeah, very much so. I think a lot of them just kind of wash their hands of you and just be like, I guess they're a lost soul. And I've had people, Christians, kind of patronize me and say, I hope you find what you're looking for. You're obviously
Yes.
looking for
Yes.
something, but you obviously had to take a weird path and turn away from
Right.
God for a while. It's like the implication of like you're a prodigal son. You'll come back to
Yes.
God, but just don't shipwreck your life too bad while you're away
Yes.
from God, and get back to him as soon as you can.
Right.
Like they can't imagine that maybe their God is just not real. But
Yep.
I think too, there's the dynamic of the fear factor that they're aware that you know some things, and that maybe you do know some things that are bigger and more advanced that they do, and that just that sense of what if she is right? What if Laurentia is right and is onto something? I would rather put my fingers in my ears and say la 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 than no, because maybe it would disturb my faith too. Not in the sense that they truly think their faith can be shaken, but just in the sense that like a satanic attack. They're like, I'd rather just not know. If you're
Yes.
effectively, even not necessarily that you're satanic, but it's like if Satan's doing these horrible things through you, I'd rather be away from it. Kind of like, when I was
Yes.
a Christian, you wouldn't touch a Ouija board, not because you thought a Ouija board would literally send you to hell. It's just like that's just Satan's a little too close to that world,
Yes.
and it's like, well,
Yes.
if you're now as brave to talk about your atheism as to create a YouTube channel, maybe
Yeah.
Satan is really involved in your life. And I think a lot of them too are just they're
Right.
they're overwhelmed too with the fact that what you might say is you need to study where the mythology came from, or you need to study this or that. You need to learn more. And for a lot of them, I think it's very intimidating because their learning is very much the Sunday school learning. Like, I need to learn how to memorize more verses, and I need to learn in quotes how to pray more often. They're not learning like where did these texts come from. They're not looking at Bart Ehrman and watching like a YouTube channel like Myth Vision, if you know that one. They're not learning
Yes.
all the great information, and that's
No.
overwhelming. If you've never been down that path, it's like, oh, there's so much to learn. And for them, they want to keep it just like, I've got a simple faith. Jesus is Lord. He is my savior.
Yes.
All I need to know is I'm good with him and we're
Yes.
good. But anyway, well, I know there's a lot more we could talk about, but I do just want to say, just as we wrap up, I I love the fact that you tell it like it is. You are one of those people that you don't seem to like. You seem like you want to be kind to people and gracious, but that there's a time to just say what's on your mind. And I appreciate that very much because we need some of
Oh,
that in our communities. We need people that are willing
thank
to
you.
say it like it is.
Oh, thank
Um,
you. I appreciate that.
yeah. Well, before we wrap up, was there anything else you wanted to add that I didn't ask about?
I don't think so. I just want to say to the people out there, small atheist channels, all atheist channels, anyone who's talking about this, just to support Tim, everyone out there, because as you know, when you look at the numbers that the Christian channels get, the love, the support, the money, the everything, even the best channels, even the Seth Andrews or whatever, it's just minuscule, minuscule, and compared to what it's such an. You talk about David and Goliath, right? You want it, David, right? Goliath is out there, and I'm sorry, a little slingshot is not going to kill Goliath. I mean, it's just going to take more and more people speaking out. We have to be braver. People that don't believe anymore. I don't love talking about. I don't. This isn't my passion. I don't love it, but someone has to step up and be brave. And we need more women. We need more people of color. We need people just saying it. So just support people who are brave enough to do this. That's what I would say.
Yeah, it's a good point too. I think it amazes me how some of the even the bizarre topics on Christian channels get so many views, like the near death experiences. Oh, I was on the operating table and I went to heaven for 20 minutes and then I came back, like 200,000 views for one video. I'm like, holy smokes. There's a lot of suckers born every minute, and they're all watching that YouTube channel. And it's just like, like it's amazing. But when you get down to like the more thoughtful ones, we are going to have smaller numbers for now. But yeah, the hope is certainly to support each other and grow. And it's cool though to see those what do you call them, the polls, where it looks like a lot of church denominations are shrinking. And so it
Oh,
does
they
give you
are.
hope that someday,
They
this
are.
culture could really shift.
Well, I'll tell you, if you wanted to blow up big, you know how you can get rich? Is decide that you're going to be a Christian again. If you did that, if you went from Christian to atheist to Christian, you would be a millionaire very
Exactly.
shortly. I've actually thought about that. Like, wow, what a little scam. I mean, when I get in those angry faces, like I was so scammed, but I couldn't do that. Let me put it this way. I guess I'm more moral than the people that were teaching me who scammed me. So
Yeah.
I'd like to think of myself as actually, even though Christians will say, well, where do you get your morals from? Well, here's a moral that I could do because if I really wanted to, I could pretend I was a Christian again and probably be a millionaire tomorrow by telling my story. But I won't do that
Yeah.
because my morals come from somewhere and it's not from God, it's from in here.
Yeah, exactly. Well said.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could probably make more money doing it that way, but we'd feel very much like charlatans. Well,
Yeah.
I just again love so much what you're doing. I just want to wrap up by encouraging people again to go to your channel. It's called The Doubter's Diary. It's a great name, and I'll have the link beneath this video. So please go like and subscribe and watch our videos. But Laurentia, so good to get to know you. Thank you so much. And I'll just wrap up by saying we've been speaking with Laurentia Wells. I hope your channel just grows and grows and grows and your voice gets bigger and bigger and all this. But thank you for sharing your story with us today.
Yeah, you too, Tim, and good luck. Thank you for everything.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
All right. All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.